As you all know, Kate Fosson, Brand Pollinators. We help support purpose-driven emerging brands to scale by connecting founders to each other and sharing resources to help you grow your business in a more meaningful way. So today we have our guest is Rob Craven, and he runs Scale Passion. He is a former CEO of Mega Food and Garden of Life, and the co-founder and managing partner of Findaway Ventures, which is a growth service and angel investment platform. So Rob is also a certified 15 commitments of conscious leadership coach, and he's really passionate about scaling change the world companies and advocates for transparency, innovation, and award-winning culture. So under his leadership at Garden of Life, they became the number 14 company on Inc.'s 500 fastest growing list. And then Mega Foods was best company to work for in New Hampshire. He's also voted top conscious business leader by Conscious Company magazine. So Rob has worked with a lot of founders and helped them scale their purpose-driven businesses, really focusing on delivering high growth results and high integrity products, brands, and businesses. So Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here, Kate. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I guess the best way to start is really maybe you could share your founder story.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, so when I was 6 years old when my dad found out he only had 2 years left to live. He had cancer. So if you can imagine being, a 27-year-old, young man back in the 70s, you got this 6-year-old kid, only child because of the cancer. And so my dad really took it upon himself to try to impart all of his wisdom into this 6-year-old, in the couple of years he had left. And so I remember vividly, I remember three of the many lessons he taught me. I remember three very vividly. Do it right. Always do it right. Be bold in whatever you do, and then make a difference. And so I can remember being 6 years old, and you guys are way too young, but back in the day, shaving cream was like a handful of shaving cream. It was like a lot. And I can remember being 6 years old and him showing me how to put it on my face. And he would hand me a razor without a blade and show me how to, he wanted to teach his son how to shave, even though there wasn't a hair anywhere on my face at 6 years old, obviously. But it was all about, doing it right and teaching me how to do that. And, when I was 6, he asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I always said I want to be a garbage man, because how cool. You get to hang out off the back of a truck all day with gloves on. It was awesome. I was like enamored. And he would say, yeah, if you're going to be a garbage man, just make sure you make a difference in whatever you do. Like, I don't care whatever you do, son, but if you're going to be a garbage man, how can you make difference in the lives of that community or people? And so he would just drop these little nuggets on me, all the time. So be bold, do it right, make a difference is always kind of stuck with me. And throughout my life, I've been able to kind of integrate that into the different roles I've had. I've been very blessed to run some amazing companies and fall in love with the natural products industry, because you've got a lot of founders who want to be bold and do it right, make a difference, especially in the natural product space, especially consumer packaged goods. If you think about it, consumer packaged goods companies have really led the way on things like organic and non-GMO and really supporting the world in different ways. And so I just feel like I've connected in this space in a way that's been very unique, and been blessed to hang out with a lot of great founders who taught me through their stories how to try to make a difference. And so my dad went on to beat cancer. Luckily, he up until about a year and a half ago, where cancer finally took him, he was really strident about it. But the lessons he taught me throughout the years stuck with me and kind of put me in the position I'm in today. And with Scale Passion, it's kind of the culmination of all these years and trying to come alongside of entrepreneurs and help them to kind of scale up. And the first core principle that I bring to founders is know thyself. And so really going deep on who you are as a founder and making sure that in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, I feel like that can be integrated into a brand in a way that helps the brand make even more of a difference, because you need that inspirational leader out front to tell the story and to motivate people, to attract great employees, to attract great investors. There are some great investors out there that really care about the founder story and what they're trying to do to change the world. And I think all things being equal, if you're on the shelf beside another brand, the competitive difference can be the founder story. If someone falls in love with the founder and their story, in my case, we were able to get a premium for the product because of the founder story and the way we were able to integrate those stories into the brand. And if you don't have to be a premium price, all things being equal, I think people would vote for a great story behind a brand, especially if they fall in love with the founder and what they're doing and how they're trying to do it. So that's why I'm here to talk about founder story today.
Wow, that's so cool. So I imagine your dad probably was able to impart a lot more wisdom than he was expecting.
For sure.
He
Yeah.
beat cancer and covered so many more years after that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was he, my hero. He went on to, long story short, he went on to work for hospice. And so he touched a lot of people through that. He was a volunteer coordinator and actually a grief counselor. And so, he was a man with a lot of perspective for sure, which I really appreciated, the empathy that comes along with that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's really cool. Wow. Okay. So I guess, I mean, you touched on this, but I mean, why does like what you're passionate about matter when you're building a business? Because I feel like, unless you're doing something really directly related to that one thing you're passionate about, how does that connect? I mean, is it really worth it to focus on your passion while you're building your business?
Yeah, I think science would say, or science, there's a guy named Ichak Adizes who 40, 50 years ago created the corporate growth cycle. And if you go on my webpage, I write a lot about him, but like on my approach, there's the Adizes curve, they call it. It's the corporate life cycles from startup. He calls it courtship. And then there's the startup transition, which is really getting off the ground. And for those of you who've done startups on the call, you know what that means. It's like, leveraging everything to get product market fit, to get the first sales, that kind of thing. That's a big part of the transition. And then there's the go-go phase he talks about. And then you hit the next transition, which is the adolescent transition. And that's when you bring on outside capital. And the key thing there is what got you here won't get you to the next stage, which is adolescence and prime. But the go-go phase, getting through that startup transition in the go-go phase has a lot to do with the founder. Most successful companies are driven by a founder and their inspiration and their motivation through that phase. And so it's really critical for a founder to leverage that. I've met some founders who are really good at it, like Jordan Rubin, who I first worked with at Garden of Life. He's fantastic, kind of motivating his own personal journey of health, telling that story. He wrote books about his personal journey of health and then using that to motivate consumers and employees to drive that go-go phase, right? So it's critical to me for most founders to drive that. And if they can learn how to, a lot of it's courage and just, we're taught to be humble and not talk about ourselves. But some founders, it's just about having the courage to really nail that story and use it to drive the business. And then there's a whole nother conversation we can have about how to integrate that into the brand. But that's the main reason why I think it's important. Adizes, science would say, our experience would say that the founder really drives it to a certain level to make sure that the brand can actually get off the ground and become successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you ever encounter people that don't know what they're passionate about? Because I feel like that's something that, you mentioned know thyself as kind of like one of the first stages. Like, is that something people struggle with? Because I feel like I've struggled with that before.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's funny because some entrepreneurs, I've talked to some founders that they just want to start a business. They want to be an entrepreneur, the idea of being an entrepreneur. When I dig a little deeper, why'd you start the business? Well, I've always known I'm an entrepreneur. But when I dig a little deeper with them, I usually start off by asking about significant events. You build trust, you build some trust first, but what are some of the significant events in your life? What happened to you when you were young? For me, it was my dad's cancer situation. There's other, events in my life that have been very significant. So writing those things down and getting them to really dig deep into their history, the earlier the better, can give a really good indication of why you're on this earth. Why did you go through that struggle? Think about it. If you had a struggle or some trauma or something that happened to you as a young person, why did that happen? So getting to the heart of why that might have happened and how it made you who you are today is kind of the first couple of steps into why'd you start this business? And so I've even coached some founders that started like insurance businesses.
Mhm.
And one of his conversations was about his mom was battered by his dad until he grew up and became a teenager and big enough to actually fight his dad off. And it took years for him to fight. And so he had a real passion for battered women. And so how do you integrate a passion for battered women into an insurance business, right? So that's about as far apart as you might get in terms of your passion versus a CPG business. It's a little easier from a consumer packaged goods standpoint. But the point is, we were able to kind of connect some dots there. And the point was, when he was able to bring that issue into his business and show his passion through it, it lit his fire again. And then lo and behold, I always say, as the founder goes, so goes the business. The business started to take off because his founder, his fire was lit again because he was able to kind of connect in with a passion. Think about the passion that comes from watching your mom being battered by your dad. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
that feeling, that emotion, that transparency, that vulnerability, he was able to bring into his employees or what they were doing through nonprofits and the foundations they set up. Another good example is one of the companies we invested in, a company called Hustle Clean, and the two founders, Justin and Wale, grew up in, I would call them underserved communities, one in Florida, one in California, like really tough underserved communities. And the way they got out was playing football. They both went to UCal Berkeley, one went on to the NFL. And so feeling that transition for them brings a lot of emotion into it. So now they've set up their own, nonprofit that helps underserved communities get access to equipment, sporting equipment. And so again, that energy that you bring to it as a founder translates into the business. As the founder goes, so goes the business. And so I love to help founders connect that dot so that they can use the energy that comes from that. And there's other things like Zone of Genius and other things we talk about that just connects you into the energy so that you show up in the right mindset to really run your business.
That's cool. I'm reading the War of Art, and and so I was just looking at that section about the muses, and it reminded me of what you said when things happen to you, like a traumatic event, like what that means, why were you exposed to that? Why did this happen to you? And so it just kind of reminded me of the idea of the muses where, there's some kind of something happening there. Like the universe is sort of trying to tell you, okay, you've got to push against this and you've got to learn from this and then carry that on so that you can do something bigger with it.
We all know somebody who's had, I would say most of us know someone who's had some trauma in their life. Maybe we've had some of our trauma. We've met some folks that carry that trauma negatively. And I would say most of the founders that I know who've been able to turn that, intentionally into a positive, can use it produces a lot of energy, like incredible energy. And part of what I took a class with a guy named Bo Eason, and it was personal story power or something class. And he taught us how to use our story in a personal way. So that first line I started with, when I was 6 years old, my dad found out he was 2 years to live. I learned that from him. It's like, what's the grabber statement? So that, you have to have some courage to do that, and it takes practice. Not everybody's comfortable talking about themselves in a vulnerable way. And you don't necessarily have to be. You can use it through the written word. But I can tell you that once you start practicing it and narrowing it down and really getting it specific, it's like a muscle that you start to lift and you see the power of it. And you've been given these experiences to use in a way that can help the world be a better place, I believe. So it's how do we tap into that and use it like a muscle. And then there's other ways to do it. Ben and Jerry's was able to make political statements through their product, to take what they were very passionate about and put it into their product. Same thing with Patagonia. And, a lot of the brands that I admire were able to really take stands on what they believe in and integrate it into the product in a way that it wasn't necessarily the founders out front. Now, the founders are the ones standing in front of lots of people, but it gets to a point where you can integrate that ethos into the brand. But the smaller the brand, I think, the easier it is, or the more important it is, in my opinion, for the founder to really carry that message and push it through, because you just don't have the marketing dollars to put it into the brand like you might a bigger brand.
Yeah. I was going to ask that. It's like, does it have to sort of happen at the beginning, or is that something where you can kind of build that story in? But I guess when you talk about the insurance company, that was kind of a good example where, maybe that wasn't really a big part of what they were doing initially, but then once they sort of added that in, then it really helped take off.
Yeah, it was basically a 15-year-old company that he had just been kind of, steady. And I said, well, and he's like, I don't get this whole thing. And so I spent a day with him just kind of digging deep. The first day I spend with founders that I work with typically goes into this part of it. It's like, what's the story? What's your significant events? What's your zone of genius? Especially as you grow a company, really understanding your zone of genius. If you haven't looked into Google zone of genius, there's some powerful stuff out there. But to me, it's about tapping into the energy source. It's like, it sounds woo-woo, but if you can, as a founder, tap into that energy source in a way, and we all know founders who've done that and been incredibly successful. It's just a powerful energy source, not only for the founder, but for the whole company. And ultimately, if you can integrate that energy and that story in the right way into your brand, it can help you set yourself apart from the competition.
Well, yeah. And I'm sure like knowing the story and like you said before, kind of knowing sort of that opening line, that grabber, that can really help when you're, pitching to investors or, if you're going to be on a podcast and tell your story on a podcast, like really kind of having those highlights that contributed to what you're building would make sense to hone in order to kind of use those in those spaces.
Huge. As an angel investor, I could tell you every investment we made had a founder story connected to it. Mimi at a company we invested in called The Loon, on her webpage, the first picture I saw on her webpage was her standing up in front of a circle of women like this, in this engaged position with this circle of women. And they were talking about menstrual health and period pain and, a touchy subject to some degree. But she went through her own story. She had her own story about how damaging this was for her in her personal life. And she was able to bring that story and bring help to others, not just through her product, but through her passion and kind of doing these circles that she was doing. So as an investor, I can tell you that, there are investors out there that are inspired by that and will stroke checks around that. And you got to have all the other things buttoned up, there's other things that go with that. But it becomes a real core differentiator, I think, for investors, in my opinion. If you're going to bet, most investors, especially angel investors and VC, most investors are investing in the founder to carry, especially an angel investor. You're basically making an investment in the founder. And so if you've got a founder that's passionate, not just about building product and making sales, but passionate about making a difference in a way that they would keep doing that, even if they didn't have a company to do it through, that's a bet you want to make. That's a horse you want to back as an angel investor.
Well, and it seems like it would really help if the founder is good at telling that story and can
100%.
articulate it, because, obviously you can have a big heart and you can really be passionate, but if you can't articulate it very well, then people may not really connect the dots for you.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. So do you have any tips along those lines about like what's the best way to communicate kind of how to connect that passion?
Yeah, the first tip I would, a couple tips. One is the significant event. List all your significant events and then see if you can map, especially the earlier significant events, see if you can start to map that back to why you started the business. Is there a way that you can do, a second tip would be the 5 whys. Like if I said to you, okay, why'd you start your business? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, why that? Okay, why that? You know what I mean? And so there's the 5 why tip that you can go deeper and deeper and deeper as you can flow through that. Would be another first idea. The other fun exercise is to write the top 10 cool things about me. Okay, and so if you can make a top 10 list of what's cool about you, then that's another opening. Well, how did I get cool around this? Like, how did I become this person? Who influenced me? Like these are some of the questions I might ask a founder, like, who was your influence? Who are your heroes? Why is that cool about you? Why do you do that? And so it's just this curiosity that you bring to it. Typically there's an aha moment, like my aha moment with my dad. I didn't know he had, early on, I was 6. I wasn't comprehending that he had 2 years. left to
Right.
live. But I was able to interview my dad on that and go deep on that and really understand him in a way through curiosity that helped me tell the story. So my typical founder story would take 10 minutes, right? There's a lot to be said there and unpacked, and you can use it to inspire in different ways. And while I was a CEO at Megafood, the sales reps there in particular, but the whole company would talk about story. I would start every meeting with a story, some kind of story about a customer, a retailer, myself, my mom, my dad getting fired, whatever it was. It was a way to bring them closer to me so that they could tap into the passion I had for using this brand to really change the world in a significant way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's about who you're talking to, whether it's an investor or a customer or your employees too, right? Because I mean, everybody, you really want to understand kind of the core of what you're building and be relatable. Most people can relate to a story in some way.
Yeah, I took over 3 companies that were between 10 and $15 million in sales. And in all 3 cases, I was able to attract people that were making way more money to take less money and bring more experience into the business to help me grow it to 60, 80, $100 million. And they wanted to come because of that passion, because of that story, because of the culture that was built around it. So that culture can be extremely magnetic. And you want to be magnetic to the people that align with your vision, that align with your passion. And when you get a group of people in a culture, like I'm very proud of the culture we built at Garden of Life. I'm very proud of the culture we built at Megafood. I mean, I still connected to those folks, and dreaming of the days when those cultures were just incredibly passionate and powerful. And what it is like-minded people trying to do something cool together. It's just very attractive. But if you're not willing as the leader of the company to share that and be that, kind of light up on a hill, you'll never get the benefit of it. You see what I mean? So it's worth it to spend some time really honing your story. It's worth it to spend some time learning how to tell stories. There's lots out there that teach you how to tell a story personally, your personal stories. I used to do voice memos once a week, maybe twice a week to the company, the whole company. But I would always start with our purpose. Like, here's the purpose of the company, why we exist. It's always inspiring. And then I would tell a story. Like this past week, I was in Indiana talking to a retailer, and he started his business because of XYZ. And I was able to bring the passion of that retailer in through the storytelling into my company in a way that made people feel proud to be in the company, right? And proud to be behind the culture. You can also aim that in the right way, as you know, Kate, through the marketing. You can do that in a way that actually expresses itself through the brand in a unique way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's so many ways that you can connect with people. And I think that's kind of the whole purpose, is that you're connecting with people on different levels. Okay. So we've had a couple of people join since we started. So I just wanted to mention too that we have, the chat is open if you wanted to add anything.
Hi, Michael.
Questions.
Yeah, Michael in the chat mentioned, that I like to send voice memos. I send a lot of voice memos from my iPhone because, and I'm starting to use another app called Marco Polo, which is even better than a voice memo because it's got a video. And so I'm encouraging my clients to use it too, because I like the emotion of it. Like if I send you an email and I say, I apologize for missing the meeting, and then I send you a video and I say, dude, I'm so sorry. I really hate that I missed the meeting. I apologize. There's a difference in that. The emotion of it is huge. And Megafood, our unique reason to believe in the brand, and it's why I still take it, is we used to buy, or the company buys organic, foods, regenerative agriculture, big leaders in that, from farmers directly, and they bring the farm fresh produce into a factory and turn it into ingredients that go into the supplements. So we used to travel to the farmer and get their story, 3rd generation farmer. Why did you go organic? And we would dig deep on that story and then integrate it into our marketing. And so the first thing you would see on the Megafood website was these stories of these amazing farmers. And so they're a founder. We were able to connect into that through the marketing and put it right on the bottle. In this bottle of Blood Builder are beets bought from this particular farm in Washington State. Here's why we care about this farm, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. I think, people just feel more invested in what's, like they can see kind of like the transparency there and feel more like they understand where their food is coming from with those stories too. Yeah. Sure. It's interesting because ahead of this call, I posted a poll on LinkedIn about if the founder story, like if people think the founder story is important when building a brand. And I wasn't sure what the results were going to be. I mean, obviously this is just kind of like on LinkedIn. So, you know, whoever saw it that responded, but it looks like we had 60 some odd votes on it so far. And I think like 80% or 85% of people said yes, that the founder story matters. Yeah, 87% it says. So yeah, it's like people understand that it matters, but then how to incorporate that and how to communicate it out, I think is really probably the key for a lot of founders. It's like, okay, I get that the founder story is important, but how do I do that?
Yeah, it's important to also note that, kind of that know thyself founder story is kind of one part of it. And, consumers, if you ask them about founder story, they might think, but if you ask them what their favorite brands are, I think, especially premium consumers in the CPG space, not all consumers, but premium consumers are usually who the smaller brands are aiming at because, costs are higher and that kind of thing. They might say their favorite brands. And then when you look at the favorite brands, a lot of them will have a founder story. You see what I mean? A lot of them are the innovative brands that they're, so making that connection is one thing. The other thing is that there's a guy named Michael Porter out of Harvard. You might know him. He actually coined the term supply chain. He wrote a seminal business book called On Competition many, many years ago. Cool guy. He created a concept several years back now called creating shared value. Have you guys heard of this, creating shared value? So it's basically the concept that, even DEI or triple bottom line, just standard kind of approaches, standard, that sounds bad, but aren't sustainable and aren't as powerful as actually integrating social impact into your business. So if you combine social impact with economic impact, Michael Porter is teaching the largest companies how to do this because it's actually more profitable and more sustainable to maintain the impact, okay, versus a nonprofit, for example, which is less sustainable to maintain the impact. So that social impact component in a company at a higher level starts with the founder. It gets birthed out of that founder passion. And so, I start with know thyself founder, and then it's how do we integrate that into a social impact piece? How do we not only say we're for these things or start a nonprofit, but how do we integrate these things into the business such that as the business scales, so does the impact? And a good example is a guy we invested in called Ethan Holmes mouthwatering applesauce. And applesauce isn't a very sexy category, but Ethan's a pretty passionate guy about underserved communities and teaching them entrepreneurism. He's been teaching entrepreneurs in underserved communities for nearly a decade. And he wants to use Holmes mouthwatering applesauce to impact underserved communities and teach them about entrepreneurism. So one of the ways he integrated this social impact, his passion into his business was he would go in and teach entrepreneurism. As a part of that, he would teach people how to demo the applesauce. And so he would take students, high school students or college students, younger adults, and take them into the store and teach them how to demo. And they'll actually do demo. He'd pay them to do a demo, but it was about how to pitch how to interact with consumers and how to think about pitching your product in a store. But he was paying less than he would a demo company. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it was a win-win-win because the students were learning something and getting paid, but he was paying, maybe 50% less, 30% less than he would a demo company that wouldn't have as much passion. You see what I mean? And wouldn't sell the product. So win-win-win. He's actually saving some money. He's increasing his gross profit. And so I spend a lot of time with founders trying to connect the dots between their personal passion, their personal story, and then how to integrate that into the business in a way that can either make more money or save money. The easiest way is to integrate the founder story into the brand messaging so you sell more product and differentiate. But there's also ways to impact your social, to integrate your social impact philosophy into try to save money with a company like Ethan did. So it can permeate throughout. And then when you go to an investor, he's actually pitching investors on building a community center in an underserved community that would have part manufacturing, so he can hire people fresh out of jail or underserved people. So that's part of his pitch now in terms of how he wants to build the business. The business serves the passion. And I can tell you as an investor, we were motivated by that. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious if there's like, if people get like founder story fatigue or something, because I was listening to this podcast one day and somebody's like, well, can't we just have toothpaste be toothpaste? Like, does it need to have a story? And it kind of bothered me because as a consumer, I'm like, well, no, it can't just be toothpaste because like, what is in it? Like, where does it come from? Like, what is it packaged in? And, who's like, I want to know all these things, but I mean, maybe a lot of people don't, or maybe people are just kind of over like, okay, does everything have to have a story? I mean, have you run into that, or do you feel like that's a thing?
It is definitely a thing. I mean, if you think about consumers broadly, it's a bell curve, right? Like, price sensitive, very premium. Okay. So if you think about it as a bell curve, the three inputs that I like to bring to a strategy with the clients I work with are know thyself. So it's not only knowing the founder, but also the company, strengths and weaknesses of the company, where are we at financially, current situation, blah, blah, blah. Know thyself, know thy customer. And this is where most small companies I work with really mess it up because they go way too broad. They're like, our customer is a woman from 35 to 65. She lives everywhere. She's got 2 kids or no kids, blah, 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 blah. As you know, from a marketing standpoint, they get too broad. So the smaller you are and the less resources you have, the tighter that consumer needs to be. Kevin Kelly calls it the 1,000 true fans, like really nailing those true fans, right? And as you get bigger, you can come out from the center of the target and go 1 ring out, not 8 rings, but like what's 1 ring out from that target? All this. But it's a huge mistake I see most founders make is they don't. And for startup founders, in particular, startups that might not have, it's basically who are you and who's the consumer that thinks like you do? And is there enough of them out there to get product market fit? That's the key thing, right? And then the third input is know thy market. Who's the competition? What are they saying? What are the trends we're on? Where's the white space? Does my social mission fit a white space? Does it hit the consumer? So the combination of those 3 things, know thyself, know thy market, know thy customer, creates a sweet spot that you operate within. And the key, in my experience, is to make sure the resources you have match up for the target you're going after in that space. And as you get bigger, like Annie's is a good example. Annie's was really tight, right? And then as it grew, it started appealing to broader and broader consumers. And they had more and more money to broaden out. And now they're doing fast food or something, like healthy fast food. So, but you don't go to healthy fast food out the gate when you got, $200,000 in cash in your checking account. So it's the combination of those things. So the toothpaste should be toothpaste person, I would submit, is probably outside of that little triangle, depending on where you're at. As a brand. And I can also say that, the other analogy I use a lot is a hose. Like if you want to get everybody wet, the hose is really broad. And if you've got lots of resources, if you've got millions and millions of dollars, this is why I think a lot of brands make a mistake going to mass retail too quickly. If you've got millions of dollars and you could spray wide and hit lots of people, great. But you don't get power and impact unless it's really tight. If the hose is really tight, now you can knock over something. And so tight consumer, tighter message. And I also believe if you're a smaller brand, being bold with your social mission or being bold with your founder story is a way to stand out with less resources. Your competition may have more resources, but if you can be bold and even controversial with your stance, it's going to attract enough people in all likelihood to get product market fit. Then you start to figure it out from there. Does that make sense? Is that?
Yeah. And I think that to me, it kind of sounds like the difference between like an authentic story and just sort of like, not greenwashing, but that kind of like story washing or founder passion washing. I don't know what it's called, but it's more authentic when you can kind of be specific and focus in on really the exact right customer, using your resources wisely to make those kind of deeper connections.
Yeah, when I first started meeting with Jordan Rubin in 1999, 2000, Jordan Rubin, founder of Garden of Life, wrote a book called Patient Heal Thyself. Was that the first book? I think it was Patient Heal Thyself. And it had a picture of him like skin and bones on the front. And it didn't even look like Jordan. And it was a very shocking picture of him very sick. Like, so he had Crohn's disease and all kinds of other stuff before anybody knew what Crohn's disease was. And so it was his story of moving from sick to well in this book. And so before I started working with him, I read the book. I was skeptical. I talked to his mom. I talked to his physician, because this was the core of this brand, right? And was it authentic and was it real? And if it's authentic and real and something I can get behind as his CEO, he hired me 3 years later as CEO, then I can bang this drum and talk about wellness and empowering extraordinary health. And, he basically, along with others, but he was one of the early pioneers that really took probiotics to a whole nother level, before anybody knew what a probiotic was. So it's one of those things where you nailed it, Kate. It's about authenticity. And if it's authentic, and the more bold it is, the more bold it is, the more likely you are to get naysayers and folks that aren't attracted to it. But the folks that are attracted to it in a much deeper way. You see what I mean? So you're doing something right if you got some naysayers because you're telling a bold story,
Yes, because it's resonating with people. It's stirring emotion, and you could get some real positive emotion from that, or it could really upset people, but that's how you know that you're connecting on a deeper level.
2 out of 5 founders I work with, 2 out of 5 probably are, it's all about courage. It's all about just try it. Just tell the story to a certain number of people. Just practice it on your family. Just, sit down with your kids and see if they understand it. Like, just try it, because it's more about the courage to say something bold. And especially if you have a story that's unbelievable or even traumatic and vulnerable. The last thing we want to be seen is someone who's inauthentic trying to sell a product through our story. That's not the goal. The story is to tap into that energy that we get from remembering why this happened to us and being passionate about how this story can help other people. And if you genuinely feel that, if you can genuinely feel that connection and not make it about selling product, then 9 out of 10 people will feel that authentic connection to your story. There'll always be some skeptics, right? But it's like, if you can get people to really connect in with your story because you feel it authentically, and it's not about selling a product, it's really about helping people and changing the world and improving the world in a unique way. And you learn to have the courage not to seek approval from outside yourself. And so don't read all the reviews and get all caught up in it. So,
Yep.
That's part of the 15 commitment stuff that I've gone deep on, is how to get past some of that. And just connect into that energy and let it flow through you.
No, that's a really good point, because it's like the more you put your story out there and the more vulnerable it is and the more personal it is, the more kind of risky it is too, because you're opening yourself up for criticism. And so you have to be prepared for that.
The first time I told my dad's story, it was in front of 500 people at a keynote at Expo East. And so I stood on a stage by myself, boohooing. I couldn't get through the story. I'm like choked up, and I'm looking at 500 of my peers and people that I know on the front row. And that level of vulnerability, you could hear a pin drop. Okay. So, there wasn't anybody rustling papers. We were all 500 of us, we were there together. But powerful moment for me in particular is the first time I ever told the story, and I'll never forget it. But it was like, the point I was trying to make was that this industry can do big things. And so using my dad's lessons to get to that point for a keynote was powerful. And it took practice, and I had to practice it, and I had to come up, it wasn't easy for me out the gate, but it's one of those things, the more vulnerable you can be, it can be very, very powerful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. I want to make sure we have time to answer any questions that people have. Oh, Gage confirming, yes, the conscious diet is the 15.
15 commitments of conscious leadership. I'm actually doing a book club, starts Friday. We're doing the first 7 commitments and going deep on it.
Very cool. That's very cool. So feel free, if you does anybody have any questions about learning what you're passionate about or telling your founder story, feel free to come off mute, or you can pop a question in the chat. I want to make sure that we answer any questions you guys have. No questions? Okay. Well, I mean, I'm just fascinated by this. And one of the things that I noticed when I was doing I looked through the Nail Your Strategy journal and was working through that. And one of the things it says at the very, very beginning is a fifth grader should easily be able to get what you're trying to say. Like, be really simple, don't get jargony, just use your own voice and make it just simple.
Right. Yeah. Huge.
Speaking
Huge.
of simple, you said, how many sentences should your story be?
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where, you should be prepared to tell your story over 20, 30 minutes, and then be prepared to tell it in 30 seconds. So it's like, it takes some practice, but it's one of those things where, or another practice is when you go through your significant events or your top 10 reasons why you're cool, if you can see a thread through that, then you can see a similar thread, like a thread that comes to mind, not for me, but for someone might be abandonment, or adventure. Like if you had a family that took you or did, there might be a thread. And so finding that thread through your story and through your life can be a great way to extend that, storytelling ability. And then these are pieces that you can break down into smaller bits. The key, I talked about the 3 inputs: know thyself, know thy customer, know thy market. Those are inputs into the purpose of the company. So the trick here, if you can get to it, is connecting your personal purpose to the mission of the company, the why do we exist statement. We exist to do this. And so it's not going to be exact, because your personal purpose is your personal purpose, and then there's a purpose for the company that attracts employees. But if you can get a string there, if you can get a tie there, it makes it easier for you to tell stories that reinforce the mission of the company. Does that make sense? So it's a cool way to kind of think about it. Gage?
Yeah, you were mentioning going back to your childhood, like there's some root experience or something back there, but I've typically started from early in my profession where I got disillusioned on the type of work I was doing and wanted to change that. How important is it to go back to the childhood? Like, do I need to trace that professional moment of why I got disillusioned and didn't like what I was doing? Do I need to go back further and figure out why, like what happened in my childhood or what?
Well, if you and I were working together, let's say, why'd you get disillusioned?
Sorry, the screen's jumping around.
Yeah. And if you were to answer that, then I'd say, well, why did that happen?
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
So it's like the 5 whys, just
that,
keep going back from that.
Yeah, I would think about it this way, Gage. Lots of people get disillusioned in work. You mean they get a job, they get a bad boss, lots of people, you see what I mean? The deeper you go into your own personal experiences, the more unique it is.
Yeah.
It's like, now it's uniquely yours. And so I would overstate that by saying it's way less boring, like way less boring. Like when I'm pushing on founders that have given me permission to push on them, I'm like, that's boring. So what? You got disillusioned, or you got fired, or okay, you had a heartburn. Great. You know what I mean? Like, and so you started an antacid company. Awesome. But the farther back you go, like, being a 6-year-old who had a dad who was given 2 years to live is a large part of why I do the things I do today. You see what I mean? And how it all comes back. But not many people were 6 and their dad was given 2 years to live. So it becomes a real unique story, and it's less boring than, hey, I got disillusioned working for this guy. I'm picking on you a little bit, but you understand my point.
Yeah. No, I get it. That makes sense. I hadn't thought about like going back further. So I'm excited to do that exercise at some point.
Well, it's also, I liken it to the energy source too. So the more you can understand about yourself and why you are who you are, and make sense of some of the things that happened in your life that might not have been pleasant, the more you can turn that into making sense for you, it becomes an energy source that's just really powerful. In my opinion, it's like, if you can tap into that energy, it gives you more courage to lead a business, or more courage to start a business, or more courage to, we did some courageous things at Garden of Life. I mean, we created we got kind of fed up with Prop 65 out in California. Somebody might know about that here. And we created a whole line of supplements just for California. And we told California they couldn't buy our supplements because we were so intent on our core values they couldn't buy our current supplements because we weren't going to put Prop 65. This causes cancer on them. So we created a California blend for 10 of our products. And we said, you guys get to buy this, talk to your senator about it. So when you can tap into that energy source and the passion and the social impact of what you're trying to do, it makes it way easier to make courageous decisions like that. Would be my experience of it.
Now you're getting curious. How did that play out?
They hated it and they went for it. I mean, they went for it until we could get some other blends that, kind of started. We innovated our way out of it, but we weren't going to go there early. We weren't going to, because we would have had to put causes cancer on all of our products for every state. And we're like, our products don't cause cancer. This is a stupid law. And so we were trying to make a point,
Yeah.
But we ended up innovating our way out of it.
Hmm. Along those lines of getting really specific. So Danny asked, how do you find the product market fit if you don't think there's enough people out there that think like you? So if you're getting really specific on what your story is, like how do you find that fit with people that maybe don't relate to your story or don't think the same way you do?
I would submit that you want to find that as fast as possible. You want to find out if you can get product market fit as fast as possible with the consumer packaged goods in particular, or any product that you launch or anything. And I would also suggest you go to kk.org or search 1,000 True Fans. And one of the things that I counsel, especially startup founders, on is what's the minimum you can do to get to the next level. And so, for example, your first level might be $50,000 a month in sales. What's the minimum number of products? What's the minimum social media channels? What's the minimum retailers? What's the minimum? Because you want to get that toehold first. And then when you get to 50,000 a month, now reassess what's the minimum I can do to get to $100,000 a month. And now what's the minimum to get to 300,000? So it's a way to really dive into that 1,000 True Fans product, really target your marketing. If your marketing is not clearly targeted at the next level, that 50,000 a month, $100,000 a month, you can go too broad, and now you're not, it's like warm water, not hot or cold. You know what I mean? It's like you're just not resonating. So I would beat the heck out of that first. I actually wrote a blog about what happened a couple of weeks ago. What happens if you don't have product market fit? Here's 4 things you can do if you don't have product market fit. I'm happy to send it to you guys as a follow-up. But it's once you know you don't have product market fit, now pivot. Now, the more you know about your own personal passion, pivot towards that. Like, now what do I want to do with my personal passion? I didn't make the product market fit thing with the consumer packaged goods. Now what do I want to do with my personal passion? Do I want to write a book? Do I want to, what do I want to do? And so I would counsel people to beat it like crazy to make sure you don't have product market fit, then decide what you want to do, with your passion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, Kimberly has had her hand up.
Yeah.
First, I want to say I love that Marco Polo example that you referenced earlier. I think it's an excellent way of just connecting with who you're speaking to. So my question is, what happens if you have a story, if you want to tell your story, but have multiple or different points of interest? So sorry, I'm not explaining correctly. So let's just say you want to talk about health, right? And so your focus is talking about your personal health, but then you also want to talk about how being sustainable and impact driven and planet forward also is an important core value. Those two sort of overlap, but don't overlap. And like, how do you tell that in your story in a succinct way? Because I think, to your point, if you need to tell it in 30 seconds on a packaging, on a website, how do you say that succinctly when they're sort of like different points?
It's kind of that bridge between your story into, what it is you're trying to do. And is that what you mean? Like that, what's the bridge?
And I think yes. And I think, to your point of like going back to your childhood, I thought like, oh, there is a point in my childhood which led me to why I become so focused on sustainability. But that's so like far, I would say like sort of like left field to my story of why I'm creating my brand focus on health driven baking.
Yeah, I would say sustainability, for example, is the result, right? What we want to get to is sustainability, for example. Mm-hmm. The bridge for me are the principles. Like you've read a lot probably about first principles. So for example, the way that I connected the dots from my story into what I do now and what I did with Mega Food and what I did with Garden of Life is my dad's principles that he taught me. Make a difference, people, do it right, right? So those become kind of my own personal core values. that if I was starting my own company, and I am Scale Passion, those personal core values become the company's first core values until I get a team and I can kind of work on that. But it's principles, not results. You see what I mean? That would be kind of the thing I would ask you to think about is what are those principles? And those principles need to be uniquely yours. And I'd watch out for a buzzword like sustainability, because in the know thy market, I would guess that your competition's talking about sustainability. Everybody's talking about, you know what I mean? So that's a part of that know thy market piece. It's like, what are the buzzwords saying? How do we stand out in that? What's our white space? You see what I mean?
Yeah. And I think, yeah, for me, like, I know, like, that's part of my core value. Those aspects are definitely part of the core value. And I think it's just defining or just talking through the story and hitting some of those core values, but sort of like connecting the dots, I guess you would say.
Yeah, 100%. And it takes some work. I mean, so it does take some work and some practice, and practicing with people that you're safe with, that'll give you great feedback. Like I had to put people around me that would actually give me feedback. And that's usually not an employee. Most employees don't want to give you good feedback. My wife, excellent at great feedback. That sucks, or that I don't get that. You know what I mean? Great. So find somebody who's really good at giving you good feedback on it. And then you can hone it and whittle it and whittle it. And then the more you can bring it to kind of principles before you connect it to a brand, the easier that is to kind of flow, would be my advice there.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Oh, John, Alex.
Yeah, I would love that, Gage. Yeah.
Thanks for doing this, because I actually I haven't really even thought about this, but like my dad basically told me was anti-recycling for his whole life and all this stuff. So it's kind of cool, like relating it back. I never really thought like how far back to go. So thanks for that. My question though is, how controversial is too controversial if like in a brand? So like I make multi-purpose body care. And I've been using the phrase of like the sentence of like similar to Dr. Bronner's, except with not soap and not in plastic. And I want to use that more in like my social media stuff. I've been doing it as like I'm talking to businesses or people. That's kind of part of my story. Is it too far to like call them out like for plastic maybe, or is it? So that's kind of like one question. And then other like natural toothpaste companies and product companies that I overlap with, like, is it bad to call other companies out, I guess, is the main question.
Yeah, it's been my experience, and Kate, you could probably talk about this as well in terms of helping brands think it through. It's been my experience that the more provocative you can be about yourself, the more, it's okay to be provocative and shocking. And, if you've got a consumer that also wants that, they can kind of relate to you. If there's enough of those 1,000 true fans out there, as soon as you start poking on brands, especially well-loved brands, you kind of take on a villain role, versus I'm really passionate about this. So you can say, I'm really passionate about not using plastic without saying they use plastic. And I think that's more attractive to most people. Like there are some folks out there who are attracted to combative, but in my experience, that's low. Now I'll give you a quick example. At MegaFood, we did a lot of consumer research on our know that consumer stuff. We got to a point where we could actually spend money. We spent 50 grand to do a consumer, real deep consumer study with a great company called Pure Branding. I'll give them a free plug. Michael knows them and other people might, but really great at consumer studies. And through the study, we weren't even looking for it. It came out that our core consumer wanted us to be advocates, wanted us to fight for them. And so we started fighting for them. We went out and got 30,000 signatures to ban glyphosate as a desiccant on oats. And I put money into, lobbying. So we got to a point where we could be fighters for them, activists. You see what I mean? So it's okay to be an activist. It's just, and I think some activists poke themselves in the eye a little bit when they start poking at other people, when they start doing this. People aren't pulling for them now. They're like, dude, why do you got to do that? Like, go do your thing, like influence people. So that would be my input on that. It's just be really strong and strident about what you believe. You know what I mean? And that is really attractive versus, that.
Yeah. Sounds good.
I think we've seen that too in like the sustainability space when you're talking about, and I'm sure Gage can corroborate on this too, but when you're talking about the impact that your product is making, if you're not using plastic or whatever, when you try to like scare consumers like, oh, this plastic is going to kill sea turtles, like the negative connotation usually doesn't have as much, like it doesn't make people want to do something as much as like something that's more inspiring. So I think I would agree with Rob that being more of a magnet and like trying to bring like that positive reason why you're there, rather than kind of putting out like we're not this, we're not that, might be a better way to get more people inspired rather than just kind of polarize people.
Yeah, because the scare tactic, I don't like that. So yeah, hearing that, it's like, oh, duh, right.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where people, I heard, I can't remember where I heard it, but somebody was like, if you can't like picture, what's the guy, Mel Gibson in Braveheart, like if you can't picture him like announcing your mission statement for you, then like it's probably not powerful enough. But it's like one of those where, rallying the troops, like you just want to get people like behind you and along the same message with you, and get that energy going together.
Yeah, I have to drop to at 1 o'clock. I've got the follow-up. I'll send you the product market fit blog. I'll also send you chapter 1 of my journal, which goes into depth on know thyself. So there's a whole chapter on how to kind of think through know thyself, and it taps into your product story in a big way. So I'll send both of those things, and I'll send them to you, Kate, and you can distribute it however you want, and then we'll go from there. And I'm available. My website, scalePassion.com, chemistry call, any of that stuff. It's a great way to connect with me. And if you want to go deeper, I'm happy to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I hope this was a good call for everyone. We are so glad to get into it with you.
Thanks, Rob.
I'm really honored. So
Thanks,
thank you
Kate.
very much for the time. I really appreciate it. Talk to you